Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of Voynich Talk, or should I say Rohonc Talk. The subject of today's video is the Rohonc Codex, that other manuscript written entirely in an unknown script. Today I'm joined by Benedek Láng and Király, who have both published on the Voynich Manuscript's lesser-known but equally enigmatic counterpart. Benedek has extensively researched cryptography in early modern, Central and Eastern Europe, with several publications about the Rohonc Codex, and Lev is co-author of what is considered the most successful decoding attempt of the Rohonc Codex. Thank you both for taking the time to do this interview with me. Now, when I Googled what are the world's most famous manuscripts, the first hit led to a list at facsimiles.com. Among the most famous illuminated manuscripts in history, they count such masterpieces as the Book of Kells, the Trébucheur de Duc de Berry, the Vienna Dioscorides, and the Bedford Hours, but also the Voynich Manuscript. In December of 2022, the University of Malta organized a conference entirely about the Voynich Manuscript, and sometimes it seems like hardly a week goes by without someone publishing a new Voynich solution. Why doesn't the Rohonc Codex receive the same level of attention?
Very good question, and I don't have a short answer to that. Well, the difference lies probably in the histories of these two sources. The Voynich manuscript became well known in the beginning of the 20th century, and the best code breakers tried to break its code and identify its origin and reconstruct its content. And no one really succeeded, or I would rather say that everyone. I mean, there is a solution for every week, but this is basically the same as if I'm saying that no one succeeded. Whereas the Rohonc Codex, or the codex that was originally found in the library of the Batthyány family in Rechnitz, today Austria. Then it was part of the Hungary Rohonc, and it was transferred to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences the first half of the 19th century. This Rohonc Codex did not become that famous. And when I think both Levent and myself, when we started dealing with it in the first decade of the 21st century, we had the impression that not too many professional code breakers tried to break it, not too many professional historians dealt with it. I mean, there were a few attempts, but that most of them were not really reliable and professional attempts.
So does it have something to do with it being kind of tucked away in the Hungarian sphere, which is not too accessible for the broader audience?
Probably, because most of the publications were written in Hungarian, and the codex itself was part of the manuscript collection of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. It was accessible, actually, but even I didn't know about it.
Right.
When I first learned about it was actually exactly because of the Voynich manuscript. I was reading a very interesting book on the Voynich manuscript, and a colleague of mine told me, it was in 2004, 2005 or 6, I can't recall it precisely. A colleague of mine told me that, do you know that we have our Voynich manuscript? And I didn't know that. I didn't know that. So then I started dealing with it. And then I realized that actually there are similarities, but there's this huge difference between the amount of interest, the amount of scholarly interest addressed to these sources.
You write that when scholarship on the Rohonc Codex started in the 19th century, Hungarian scholars were enthusiastic about its supposedly early Hungarian script. However, by the late 19th century, this enthusiasm had shifted to suspicion and skepticism. Why was it long thought that the codex was a fake?
Yes, in the 19th century, Hungarians were obsessed by finding Hungarian linguistic mementos, monuments, or early sources. And actually, they found a lot. But some of these were fake sources, and some of them were simply not Hungarian. And with the Rohonc Codex, the huge misunderstanding in the 19th century was that if something is supposed to be a Hungarian linguistic monument. And it turns out to be not, that it proves not to be a Hungarian linguistic monument, then it should be a hoax. But that was just a misunderstanding. The Rohonc Codex doesn't claim to be Hungarian in any sense of the word. But you mentioned the date when it might have been created. We know that the Voynich Manuscript, at least the parchment of the Voynich Manuscript, comes from the early 15th century. Quite similarly, we have external and internal proofs to date the Rohonc Codex. And if we check the watermark on the paper, because it's actually written on paper, we check the watermark, it's very likely that the paper was created in the second half of the 16th century. So it's much later, but still it's an early source.
Did you learn anything more about the watermark?
Yes, probably North Italy. But you have to know that in Central Europe, there were paper books everywhere that were created in Northern Italy. So it doesn't narrow down the possibilities. It's probably a Central European, Northern Italian, or Central European source. And paper books were so expensive at the time that it's very unlikely that it remained unwritten for decades or centuries. We have internal evidence as well, but these proofs will be rather detailed by Levente because they identified the internal evidence. The text itself also speaks about the last decade of the 16th century.
Is it true that the Codex has been associated with this historical figure, I forgot his name, who was known to forge documents?
Yes. Nemes Sámuel Literáti was a famous forger, and he forged very many historical documents, but these are very low quality fakes. So even a non-historian can easily recognize that these are not medieval. Usually they claimed to be medieval sources. They were short, they were extremely low quality fakes. I can't even imagine how people in the 19th century could believe for some time that they were real. Some of them were not even believed to be real for even a short period. Some of them are of higher quality, but the Rohonc Codex is very different from them. It's much longer, doesn't claim to be Hungarian, doesn't claim to be medieval. So it was just because it was an easy association to believe that this guy could have created. And the history is also different. It's coming from a different place, from the Batthyány library. So nothing really supports the idea anymore that Literáti, he was called Literáti, Nemes Sámuel Literáti, forged the Rohonc Codex.
Right. What personally often bothers me when people talk about these documents, both the Rohonc Codex and the Voynich being forged, is that, well, what are they forgeries of? Like, what are they trying to be? If you're a fraudulent book dealer, you're going to make something that you know people might want to buy, and you're going to make something that's sought after. So you're not going to make something that's only itself, that's not really exists in the collecting world. So it just doesn't make sense for me. I think it's both manuscripts are very similar in that way, I think.
I fully agree. In the 20th century, we have a book market. So it makes sense to forge something for this book market.
Yes.
But in the 16th century, 17th century, book markets were very different. I can imagine in theory that someone forges something for Emperor Rudolf II because he was collecting curiosities. But this is not a very strong explanation for the Voynich Manuscript, I believe. But at least it's beautiful and it's appealing. But the Rohonc Codex, believe me, it's not beautiful. It's not appealing. So why to forge it for someone for someone to buy it? It simply doesn't fit historically. So of course there were forgeries throughout history. We know about forgeries from the medieval times, from the early modern times. but there were usually legal documents
Yeah.
that claimed something that was important for someone. Forging something for the book market to sell as a curiosity, as something expensive, doesn't really fit these images.
Now about the glyph sets of the codex. For Voynich, it's impossible to determine how many glyphs we have because it depends how you order the strokes. But it can be roughly said to be about okay for an alphabet system. Now with the Rohonc Codex, I think we're looking at something completely different. Is that correct?
So it's very interesting that that the Rohonc Codex was taken as a hoax because it. I mean, people, some historians categorized it as a false Hungarian runes monument. So there were Hungarian runes, or I don't know if this is the most proper name for this kind of writing, but it resembles Turkish
inscription writing.
Yeah,
yes.
and runes as such.
Yeah.
And it's debated how much Hungarian people have ever used these, but there was a revival of these in the 16th century.
Oh.
And we know, I mean, I think most of the old monuments of this writing come from the 16th century. So there are some examples from earlier, but those are very short, and many of those are debated whether those are writings at all, etc. So when historians started debunking the fake monuments of Hungarian runes, it seemed fashionable to categorize the Rohonc Codex just one more of these.
Right.
Although I think that those historians did not personally see the codex, or they didn't see the extent of writing that there is, because you won't forge like a 448 pages document just to convince somebody.
Yeah.
And the most striking feature of the codex is that it's not an alphabet. And I faced this fact very early because I was so enthusiastic that I started to create a computer font to imitate these signs or symbols. And the number of these symbols grew very quickly. So just after coding like 2 or 3 pages, you were above 100, but in the end, this font ended up containing like 1,500 symbols. One could claim that this resembles a syllabary, because usually syllabaries contain several hundred symbols, but in the end, the codex turned out to be some kind of a codish writing. So even though we have symbols that closely resemble Latin letters, maybe mirrored, but still like a C or an I or a capital N, but they don't, and they can't actually, we proved that, they can't mean anything in themselves. They only mean something when they are in a group, in groups. So these groups have meanings, like a codes. Yeah.
Is there anything elsewhere that resembles this, or would it be unique?
It's very, very unique, and I think that made deciphering it so difficult, because people are naturally looking for analogies, and this just has no analog.
I mean, some of these symbols might have analogs, and they were identified as alchemical symbols or letters, mirrored letters. But these are just, these are just characters which might remind you of something else, but the writing itself has no analog at all, has no analogy at all.
For the Voynich, we can say, okay, it's a bit numerals, it's a bit Latin abbreviations, and then some other stuff, but we can kind of see where they got their inspiration from. But here you're saying there's not really one source, one inspiration where these...
Well, we could list all the 1,500 symbols and look, well, most of them are just variations of similar forms, but how would you compare them to anything when there are so many? And if you look at the most frequent of these kind of letters which make up the codes, The most frequent ones are just too frequent for a natural letter writing. So the most frequent, I think, that's the C shape, which makes up like 10% of the entire corpus. So that's very unnatural. And if you take like the 10 most frequent letters, they are already 1/4 of the entire document. So this doesn't behave like a natural language. These are just letter-made codes, to say. So it's very, very unusual for any kind of writing.
That was actually one of the reasons why very many code breakers gave up and thought that this is a hoax. In every enciphered encrypted text, you are looking for repetitions and patterns. Right. And in the Rohonc Codex, there are too many of them. And for even myself, frequently I came to the conclusion that this cannot be real. You cannot have so many repetitions, and even though there are 100, 500 symbols, but very few of them make up the 80% of the whole codex, and very many of them just occur once or twice. Yeah. So this is very suspicious, you see.
I have never calculated the entropy of the codex text. I think, yeah, it should be very, very low, even lower than the Voynich, because when you start, so on the left side in the 4th row, on the right end of the row, because you read from right to left, there is this Z-shaped thing with a dot above, and if you see this symbol, it is always followed by 2 Z shapes without a dot. This Z plus above dot, this doesn't occur anywhere else, only with 2 Z's following it. And I wasn't the first to notice this. There was a man called Miklós Lacsmándi, who already in the 90s observed this kind of phenomenon. There's some letters always come together and never in any other arrangement.
But then why don't you just say that this is one glyph?
Because the Z shape itself may appear in some other ligatures, or for example, if you go 3 lines lower,
like here at the bottom, there's also a Z.
Oh yeah. Well, there, yeah. Actually, I was wrong, because there the third one, the Z has this kind of a hand reaching out.
Yes.
Now that's that's a variant, but that's the only variant of this type of thing. Right. And but just right next to that, you can see a Z and 2 Z's connected. So that's another typical group of symbols, which of these Z types, we may call them. And there are some more. For example, 2 rows above, there is a Z which has kind of a wing backwards.
Here.
Yeah, there.
Yeah.
And that's why it's very difficult when you don't know the meaning of these to draw the boundaries between the codes. Yeah. Because you don't know where one starts and where one ends. And actually, Gábor Tokai, my fellow companion, who actually reached the breakthrough in deciphering the codes, he started from very long chunks of codes. So he started to make sense of sentences, so to say, and then he narrowed down the meaning as he could. I think that was the only possible approach of this kind of text.
Now, if I take a random page, let's say this one, would there be a number of symbols here that I haven't seen before on any given page? Or how?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look on the right side, there is this how to describe?
There's a bunch of flowers here.
Yeah, those flowery things, those appear only at these pages, at this section.
Do you think some of these are pictographic at all?
Yeah, they are actually. And for example, there are kind of pictographic signs. For example, on the left side, in the 1st row, there is this word at the beginning, but then you see a pot or a bowl. Now this actually means bowl or pot.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, the next one, this CI and these little lines, these mean water.
Almost
so
like a shower
you can make, that's right. So you can make an abstract connection to the meaning, and there are quite many of these which have some abstract connection, or which look like abstract pictograms. For example, in the second line, just almost below the water, there is this sitting sculpture thing. That's Jesus.
Ah.
So you can also make an abstract connection between a person sitting on a throne or something like that.
Like Lord.
Yeah, or Lord. Yeah, but actually Lord is the capital N before that. But, so it's
right.
But we could only say this after a long time of research, of course.
Yeah, okay. I think I read in one of the papers, I don't remember where, that there might be multiple scribes, but then that maybe there are not multiple scribes. What's your current view on that?
We don't really know if these were multiple scribes or just one person who was sharpening the pen sometimes. Yeah. Our colleague Gábor Tokai, who was mentioned by Levente a few minutes ago, he supposed like 15 years ago or 12 years ago that there were many scribes, one after the other. Mm-hmm. I myself had the impression when touching the real manuscript, so not only reading the photocopies, but touching the real source itself, I had the impression that this is the same person or the same hand. Mm-hmm. But sometimes the letters really change. They really change, but it might be rather due to to a different tool or to just sharpening the pen. Mm-hmm. I don't know what Levente's impression right now, because I remember that we were discussing that and we did not completely agree.
Generally, I assume that it was a single person writing the entire thing, but yes, there are changes in the penmanship. But so sharpening the pen can change the penmanship significantly. It's a very strange thing that there are long sections of text repeated in the codex, and sometimes these contain changes and even errors, and sometimes there are errors, I would say, which look like the person copying the text did not fully understand what he or she is copying. Mm-hmm. So as if it was just copied in a mechanical way. Mm-hmm. And you know, when the shapes are obscure or it's badly written, the person would just imitate it in a bad way, which doesn't make sense. So it's very difficult to tell if the author just forgot much of what he came up with on the first occurrence of the text and just tried to copy it, or that was a different person trying to make sense of something.
Now, I think both of you are mostly focused on the text, but we might still talk about the imagery for a little bit. So the style of these drawings is unlike anything I've ever seen before. Like with these figures seen from the side with these pointy noses and these pointy beards, almost look like gnomes with these caps. Have any parallels for this general style been found anywhere at all? Both looking at each other.
Published an article on that, so I'm leaving it to him. But I think we think that there are lots of parallels. Yes.
Yeah, but not of the style, because the style is very unique. And we just talked with Gábor Tokai recently, and I think he said that these could be called drafts. So this is a draft-like drawing, and he wouldn't call it ugly because it contains you know, a judgment about somebody. But this is still very, very unique. And now considering the iconographic features of these drawings, you can find a lot of parallels.
Yes,
so,
yes.
And that's what Gábor Tokai wrote about and talked about in several presentations. For example, this picture. This is Jesus and Pilate in the front. Now, the rest of the picture looks like some kind of a church or a palace, and you can see the ark above the two figures with these these sharp things. Now, Gábor Tokai says that this is a misunderstood Gothic style. So Gothic churches have these buds or roses or some kind of figures on arcs, for example, so that so that the architecture should not have a long line without any ornament. And the author must have seen such architecture, but didn't memorize it correctly and misrepresented it on the drawings.
Now, I would say you call it a sketch, but on the other hand, there's a lot in here that's not necessary, like a lot of decorative patterns.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
still some effort has been put into it.
But it's very controversial because at the same time, this is a very interesting example for a drawing. It had been drawn over a line of text, so you can see that the author started writing the text on the top, but then decided that this should be a full page image and just drew over. So the person must have been very controversial, and it is very difficult to deal with this in a scientific way because the theory which tries to reconstruct the person will be controversial, and that's not a very nice thing in science. But this is a fine example of that, how controversial the author was.
Now, so if you tell me like, okay, there's this images with people drawn in a very weird, abstract, almost hesitant way, and the text runs from left to right, I think Semitic cultures.
Right to left.
Right to left. Sorry. Yeah. I think. Okay. That's either a Jewish culture or an Arabic culture, because their writing system goes right to left, and they have various degrees of taboos on literal depiction of human figures. Now, that's not saying that I think that's what, because I have no opinion on this codex whatsoever, but those two things would point there.
Yeah, we were playing about with such theories from the beginning, but none of them has proved to be strong enough to take it seriously. But yes, for example, many of the frequent letters of the text resemble, or just a little resemble, Hebrew letters. So the C exists in the Hebrew alphabet. Well, it's a very simple shape, so it appears in virtually in any alphabet. But there is this triangle thing. I'm trying to find one on the page, like from the bottom up on the third, in the third line. Yeah, there is the C. We pronounce it D, but it's not a D, just like the CDED.
Right.
It might be actually the Dalet, the Hebrew D is like a right angle thing. So maybe the author has seen a Hebrew book once, and some of these shapes caught his mind. You never know, but the language itself is a mystery so far, because we couldn't determine what the underlying language is. We translate these symbols in a semantic way, so that we grasp the meaning of a chunk and then just put it in our target language, like English or Hungarian, and then finally kind of put some syntax on it to make it to make sense. But we don't know what language the author was thinking in.
But you should be able to say, for example, if they prefer SOV order. Or
that's right. Yeah, we started this this kind of investigation like 5 years ago, and we just stuck, and that hindered our publications a lot, because we wanted to say something about this, because it comes naturally to ask this. But we try to compare European languages, Hebrew, Turkish, and we just didn't conclude anywhere. But we have to add that we are not linguists, so it's very difficult to deal thoroughly with the subject that you're not an expert of. So maybe someone will come up with a proper theory about this.
Right. So one very easy thing to say is, okay, does the adjective follow the noun, or does the noun follow the adjective? Is that something you could see?
This language let's call it the Rohonc language. So the Rohonc language is quite free. It's not like German where the word order is very fixed, and it's not like it's not even like English, because in English still you have to start with the subject, which is followed by the verb and so on. But it's also not like Hungarian. Hungarian is generally a very free word order language, and the topic or the emphasis determines which words come to the beginning of the sentence. But in Hungarian, we don't use prepositions. We use endings, which determine the syntactic function, and the codex text uses prepositions. So we were, making way vague theories. Maybe the author was a polyglot, and he was partly thinking in Hungarian, partly in Latin or whatever, or Italian. And well, we don't know many of these languages, not even on a very low level. So maybe someone who knows Italian, for example, or medieval Italian, they will recognize it.
Latin is a bit more like Hungarian, I guess, since you have a relatively free word order.
Yeah, free word order would match, but Latin still uses prepositions. So, well, it would fit more the codex. But the other very strange feature of this writing that not very many syntactic functions are denoted. So we have the prepositions, but generally there are absolutely no endings, except for words and some pronouns. But even those are denoted in a very sick way. Because simply the subject is repeated, which obviously does not appear in any natural language. So this is surely an artificial construction, but it doesn't tell much about the underlying language again. And actually, you are just skimming through the pages of the Passion and Resurrection. This shows Christ in the middle. And on the right side, and even this text says the three Marys. There was a Catholic tradition which united, or how to say,
Mary Magdalene, Mary of
Bethany, and there was
Mary,
a woman called Salome, and even she was kind of renamed Mary to make this fit unified whole. So the three Marys did appear at the resurrection here, and on the left side, those are women as well, but we couldn't. We were unable to figure out the tradition which speaks about them, so we don't know who they are.
So in this case, for example, this would mean three, like Roman numeral almost.
Yes.
And this is the sign for Mary.
Yes. Yeah, with these dots around the lying S.
Okay. Okay, interesting.
And you can see these names in the text as well. So right in the upmost row, there is Mary just above this.
Suddenly this whole text is full of Mary.
Yes, and the three Marys. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now that is.
Now, back to the pictographic signs. So on the left side, fourth row from the bottom, there it says the three Marys C. And the OI is the symbol for C, but it's followed by Mary again because it doesn't put a proper ending on the verb. It repeats the subject. So since Mary is the subject, it says the three Marys, C Mary.
Right.
You see? And then comes the preposition in, and there is the tomb. The tomb is a pictographic symbol.
It's almost like some really weird computer code where you have to not think like a human, but think like it's really weird.
Yeah.
So three Marys, C Mary, tomb.
In tomb. And this CD thing is a man.
Okay, so three Marys, C Mary, in tomb.
Oh, wait a sec, maybe. No. They saw in the tomb the body. This is the CDCDE, which means body, and it follows the O and Jesus.
Okay.
And CI
Right.
something. So this means the three Marys saw in the tomb the body of the crucified Jesus. That's
Oh,
right. So
okay.
the CI something is the crucified.
This works really well.
Yeah.
Yeah. To really check to what extent your solution works would take me like many months of dedicated study. But so far it feels to me better than the kind of Voynich theories we get often.
Yeah, but you can perhaps get a notion of how difficult it is to prove that our theory is correct, because you
Yes.
have to be able to start reading the text,
Yes.
which is like learning a foreign language.
Now, one thing that people will immediately wonder here, of course, is okay, compared to the Voynich, in the Voynich, we don't know from the images what the text should be. Like, for example, choir 13 with those naked ladies, nobody agrees about what is even going on there. We don't know what genre of text we're looking at. Here, you do, you know exactly what to expect to a certain degree. Like, okay, you could expect some poetry or some Bible texts.
Actually, I don't agree, because in the beginning we were not sure. We were not sure because the images might be there just to hide the real content. So for some time, I've for example, supposed that the images should be ignored because they have nothing to do with it. This was a decision from the side of the code breakers that they relied on the images. And once you accept that the images are really mean what they mean, that they really mean what they mean, then you have a lot of scribes, a lot of entry points, because, for example, you see the name of Christ, you see the name of Pilate, you see that in the text that surrounds this image where Christ is standing in front of Pilate, you have Pilate a lot of times, and otherwise this combination doesn't really appear in the text. So then you start trusting the images that they really mean what they mean, and this is something about the Bible.
Right.
We also had a very, very strong clue with numbers. It wasn't even us coming up with finding numbers in the text. It was Otto Györk,
okay,
a military guy who also had success in finding numbers in a Hungarian author's encrypted diary. And so he became famous, and he was sent the Rohonc Codex. Maybe he can do something about it. And he actually found repeated chunks which behaved like Roman numerals. But he couldn't go on because the text itself was too difficult for him. But he made a few other observations as well, which were very helpful in the end. But what we started mapping all the numbers in the text, and it turned out that many of the small images have a very similar pattern of text next to them, and in a very specific position in this pattern there was always a number, and just before the number there were only 4 choices of codes or symbols. So that was very tempting to say that those are the name of the Gospels, and the numbers that follow are something like chapter numbers or something like that. And it was very embarrassing because we then found parallels between the matching Bible stories, and there were many cases where the numbers were wrong. So, for example, we had a theory that one of these symbols was Mark, but then there came an initial with Mark 25. Now, the Gospel of Mark only has 16 chapters, so what are we talking about? We didn't know. But on the other side, we found the feeding of the 5,000 from the Gospel of John, which specify the chapter correctly, and you could see the numbers of the story in the text, the 5,000 and the five loaves of bread and the 2 fish, and at the end the 12 baskets of food that were gathered after the party, and so on. And so we knew that the text matches the Bible, but in several other cases it did not. So that's also a very controversial thing, which is very difficult to explain. We have no explanation for that.
So you would say at least some parts are just regular Bible texts?
Paraphrases of Bible texts, I
Right.
would say. And it's mostly similar to late medieval Catholic pious literature.
Okay.
As far as I know, although I'm a theologian by profession, I'm Protestant, so I know very little about late medieval stuff because that's usually already considered Catholic from a Protestant viewpoint. But yeah, we still try to educate ourselves about these, and I already know that there was Jacobus da Voragine, or Jacob of Varazzo. I don't know what the most frequent English name or how to denote him. So he was he wrote the Golden Legend, which is a collection of stories of saints, and many of his stories can be found in the Rohonc Codex, but not word by word. And sometimes the codex has different detail than Jacob, and this shows that the codex comes from a very similar literary world, but draws its sources from somewhere else.
Why would anyone do this? Come up with this code that's not like any other writing, but that apparently requires some effort to transfer regular text into this.
Okay, yeah, that has actually been fashionable in the 17th century. We have lots of artificial language schemes. Intellectuals, leading intellectuals of Europe, all made up their languages. Even Isaac Newton, Leibniz, but they didn't get that far as this one. And today, there are whole web pages where people make up languages with grammatical exceptions and irregularities, and they congratulate each other when someone could make up a language which is really beautiful and I don't know. So artificial languages or made-up languages, constructed languages, have a very long story. And apparently already in the 16th century, we had some such languages. And some of them used the regular alphabet. Some of them created their own alphabets. And if you have such a language in front of you, and if you want to read it, but you don't have the description, you don't have the grammar, you don't have the vocabulary, then they become basically code systems. So you can break them as a code system. Perhaps this author didn't want to hide anything. Perhaps he was just boasting that, look, what kind of beautiful language did I invent?
So you're saying that this would be extremely advanced then within that genre?
I'm not sure. They were more intellectual inventions in the 17th century. I wouldn't call it very advanced. Well, it's advanced in the sense that we have quite a long text. And very often these artificial language schemes were practiced, or their merits were demonstrated on shorter texts. But the texts these authors usually used were very often religious texts, biblical texts, prayers. So it really fits this story in this sense. Of course, it's quite a long demonstration. Look at my constructed language, how beautiful it is, and then I write 400 pages. It is long, and it's a very early example. But we don't know too much about the earliest centuries of this constructed language story. Because we know that already in the 11th century, Hildegard of Bingen had her constructed language. We can imagine that the Voynich Manuscript is the result of such a constructed language. We just don't know. But
you're talking about a constructed language, but we don't know the underlying language in this case. And I would still theorize that this might be just Turkish, or this might be just like Chinese, for example. Maybe who knows how a Chinese man came to Europe and tried to write down his thoughts, but maybe he didn't learn his own writing at home, so he tried to invent something, looking at the European books of the time. So I would say this is just an artificial writing and nothing else. And the interesting thing is that yes, it has some peculiarities which make it behave like a specific language, but that's just the writing part, I would say. So like Chinese, or for example, in ancient writing systems, you had ideograms, so which a symbol which meant that the following symbol stands for a name and not for the object that it depicts. And I could say that those peculiarities we have in this writing are just on the same level. It's on the writing level.
Do you actually think someone in the 16th century could invent ideograms if they didn't know about their existence from another culture? Like, is that really something they could come up with at that time?
Why not?
Well,
because intelligence is a very strange thing. So intelligence does not equal education. It does not equal knowledge. It's just a faculty of the mind by which you can discover patterns. And an unlearned person with very high intelligence could just invent a thing like this if they need it. So
in other codes or encrypted works in general, do you ever find that the writing order is reversed from what we would expect? The writing direction?
I'm not sure this Hungarian runic writing also went from right to left.
Well, it did, yes. And actually
Yes.
that was a reason for people to think that this might be related.
But it's rare. When a text is encrypted, then it doesn't really go from right to left, although I have never checked a Turkish Arabic encrypted text, so perhaps there it does. But we just agreed that this is not the result of a conscious encryption. This is not, basically it's not cryptography. I'm very sorry for saying that because I have become a cryptography scholar thanks to the Rohonc Codex, but this is not a cipher. We can call it artificial writing. We can call it perhaps constructive language. Perhaps it's not a constructive language, but it's not. It's rather like a code, and it's not a cipher. So we don't really need to compare it to encrypted texts. But artificial writings or any kind of writing can go from right to left. Just it's fairly rare in the European area.
Well, we have thoughts about the unlearnedness of the author, but it's again very controversial because the writing is very fluent from the beginning, and we noticed some kind of development of code throughout the codex, but it is very little compared to the whole. So the author must have practiced before writing this codex. And at the same time, when you translate the text, you find kind of unfortunate phrasing or strange ways of expressions, which would probably go further than just problems with or issues with translation. So the person was not a speaker or was not a writer in the sense that he or she didn't have the routine of writing. So it's again a quite controversial thing because it seems like the author had been practicing before, but again the text itself shows some kind of, we would say, ugliness, but this would again convey some kind of judgment. We don't judge the author. It's just strange, very strange.
Okay. How about the order of the pages? Are they out of order currently?
At the beginning, at the end of the codex, on both sides, about 6 or 8 folios were just torn off or fell off. We don't know, and some of these are missing as well. So there are some parts of texts which are missing there, and we don't know the extent or the length of these texts because we don't know how many leaves or folios are missing. But as we became able to read the text, we could rearrange the existing folios in a logical order.
So the body of the text is still in its original order, or did you rearrange everything?
And it's in binding, it's bound.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Now, when I looked on the internet about your theory, I came immediately on Cipher Mysteries to Nick Pelling's blog, and I saw he was quite critical of certain points. Now, some of that went over my head. I don't know. So if you can say anything about that, like what his criticism was and why you probably don't agree with it.
Well, he liked the part where we described the codicological features of the codex. So we tried writing everything in a very meticulous way, and that seemed very scientific to him. But you know, these controversial features of the writing strike anyone with no direct experience of the writing itself. So it's difficult to believe that we come up with a very elaborate solution, which is messy.
Right.
And I think one of his strongest criticisms went against the code translation. So he missed the part where we explain what the individual letters mean. And that's kind of natural for someone who's looking for a substitution cipher or some kind of a cipher generally. And we don't have that. So we went to translate this text like an ancient script, as if we discovered another cuneiform or something. So you don't translate all the little strikes in a cuneiform. You just translate the ideograms. That's what we did. But this looks like a word made up of letters, but it's not actually in semantic way.
How much of the codex can you translate currently?
We can translate almost the entire codex, but the problem is that we have a lot of codes which we haven't found an external analogy. For example, you have a story of a boy and a girl, and the father of the boy is a king, and the father of the girl is a robber, and there is some conflict for which the robber puts the boy in a prison, but the girl lets him out, and in the end they got married. Now, we can relate this story like this, but we don't know who the main characters are. So there has probably been a well-known story or a novel or something in the Middle Ages about this girl and the boy. And when you see the names of these persons, you see allegorical meanings. So the boy is called the Christian boy, and the girl is called the faithful girl. And this is a very general method for the writer to express names. So the author usually came up with some kind of allegorical connection to something when people or persons or places were named.
So they avoid having to invent a symbol for a proper name.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is a very very frequent technique of the author. So for example, for Galilea, the symbol contains the symbol of the disciples, because that was the place where most of the disciples came from, obviously.
Okay.
So we have these connections, but we don't know how to name these characters in an English text.
Benedek, are you completely convinced of everything he's saying?
The difference between Nick Pelling and myself was when this first article was published by Levent and Gábor, was that I had access to the whole, not the whole, but most of the dictionary and the grammar. And since then, these are available for everyone who is interested. So the dictionary is available through a web page where you can check the meaning of every ideogram. And the grammar was also sent out to the audience of the Histocrypt conference in 2021. So I'm really not surprised that Nick was skeptical like 5 years ago or 6 years ago. I don't know when it was.
Yeah, it's some years ago.
Exactly, just on the basis of the first article. Because the first English article did not contain everything. Levent and Gábor wanted to write 4 articles, and they put 1/4 of the information, first one. I had access to the previous Hungarian articles and to the dictionary and the grammar. And because of this, I am convinced. But of course, in the beginning, it was strange that I was working on this Rohonc Codex, and two guys come to me and they say that they can actually read it. Of course, I was skeptical. And also, you have to know that if you want to confirm or disconfirm this solution, you have to invest some time into it, quite a few hours. So it's not with an encrypted text. Usually, you only need a half an hour to decide if a solution is right or not. With a code system, it's more. But I mean, it's not endless. So if you have 2 days, then that should be enough. If you have just a few hours, after a while, you will recognize patterns which are very convincing. And also that on the basis of the reconstructed text, the code breakers could identify prayers, well-known prayers and stories, which didn't have external evidence. So it's not that there was an image next to it, so that's why they reconstructed it as a prayer or as a specific biblical story, but rather they used their knowledge on the language to reconstruct the text, and then the text proved to be Ave Maria or whatever prayer, and these are very convincing.
Right. So, are you currently still working on it? Are you trying to improve or complete the?
There will always be some room to improve. We are finishing and polishing our the sequels of the first paper, so it's likely to come out this year. I mean, even maybe all of them.
Okay.
So finally, Nick can be convinced.
So you're planning a publication soon?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're finishing actually those. Those are, like, I would say it's 95% ready. We just have to cut the end where we stop, because you can always find some reason to continue.
Of course, yeah.
And like as it is usually with breaking codes, you might not be able to break every single code, because you always need a context that you relate to. And for example, in this story, which I just told you about before, you might not meet this story in the external world, and you will never know what names the author was thinking of when he, or for example, the name of the soldier is, and there is a symbol. And we don't know any tradition in which the soldier has a name. So we don't know how to translate that.
Okay.